All right, now I'm going to actually start thinking about what am I actually carving away. One of the things I have to think about, I do have a hole in it, and I want that hole in it to really be something that gives it a lot of impact. So I'm going to use my Niji carving tools. I'm going to start carving away. One thing, be sure you're not carving directly at your hand like that. Always try and hold your hand away from the path of your carving tool, because otherwise those can slip and then bam, you get a great big gouge in your hand, and that's not something you want to deal with, I'm pretty sure. So I've got to really look at it. Remember, this is my base, so I want to really look at it, and periodically I want to hold it up straight out in front of me and rotate that so I can really see what's interesting and what's kind of boring. Like from this side it's kind of boring, from that side it's kind of boring. I've already got some interest here, but what I'm looking for is how to create movement from one part to another. It's almost like I'm creating pathways, ridges that follow from one side to another. One of the problems is that people tend to kind of carve whatever that tool, whatever mark that tool makes, that's what they carve. So they just kind of are happy with that. So they kind of carve channels around through there, and they just make these stripes with the size and the shape of the tool. You want to avoid that. You want to carve, or you want to avoid just carving a bunch of holes in it, making it look like Swiss cheese. Okay, so I'm going to carve away here. And one of the first things that I'm going to do is open up that hole more. It's very often helpful to not just have just a round hole. Holes do not need to be just round. Okay, your sculpture can, the hole in your sculpture, if you have one, should relate to the forms around it. Also, just because it originally came out this far, doesn't mean it needs to stay coming out that far. When your sculptures are really wet, they're very easy to carve. As they start to dry, they become more difficult. You can wet your sculptures down again, and that makes it easier to carve. So again, just like Michelangelo, I'm removing the stuff that's not part of my sculpture. It's just excess. It's in the way. I kind of hold the back of that tool back against the heel or the meat of my hand. And I'm removing stuff that's in the way, that slows down the movement. And I want to keep looking. It's tempting to just sit there and carve and carve and carve and carve and carve, but you got to keep looking at it. You want to probably stop and look almost as much as you want to carve. It's like, okay, did that help me any? What do I need to do from there? Like removing that made it so that I didn't have that kind of roadblock right there. So I kind of look for those shapes that I already have and I enhance those. Generally, I want to get rid of all that weird baggy texture, because that's just crunchy bit stuff that gets in the way. That's chump change. We want to get rid of that. And sometimes that's the first thing you want to do. You just want to get rid of stuff that can't possibly be helpful for your sculpture. From that angle, the hole really doesn't do much, so maybe I need to open that up a lot more. Some cautions. You want to make sure that you are really thinking about the strength and the form of your sculpture, both visually and physically. If you've got a really thin spot, you may want to not do much to that until closer to the end so that you don't break your sculpture. If you do break your sculpture, we have some ways to kind of take care of that. I don't want to hold my hand underneath there and carve, because odds are good I'm going to really stab myself. Okay, so let's say that's the end of the day. Then you kind of knock off all the crunchy bits, put this in your tray, wipe off any of the plaster on your tools. Don't leave them all gross. You can take dry paper towel over them. I'm going to set my tools aside, and I'm going to move my board down underneath. I'm going to slide all that crusty bit off of there, and then this I take over to the trash. Again, I fold that into kind of a V a little bit, and then I shake that into the trash. Then this goes back on the stack of the carving cardboards on the square table.